People still talk about that moment, the moment when Keanu Reeves opened his arms and held Sandra Bullock close, not like a movie scene, not like a performance, but like two souls who had known pain and understood it deeply. But the world never knew what happened before that hug. They never knew the struggles, the quiet grief, the silent nights that shaped both of them. And it all started long before cameras were watching. It began during a time when Keanu was already known for his kindness. But behind the kindness was a man holding broken pieces of his own heart. He had lost people he loved. He had walked through sadness that most people only read about. He smiled softly in interviews, joked gently with others, but his eyes carried a quiet ache, like someone who had learned to keep his suffering inside his chest where no one else could see. People admired him, but very few understood him. They praised his simplicity, his humility, how he took the subway, how he gave away money, how he never made others feel small. But inside, Keanu lived like he was always on the edge of remembering something painful. Sandra Bullock was also living behind a brave smile. She was warm, bright, and full of light, but her life had also been shaken. Her trust had been broken before. Fame did not protect her from heartbreak. She had learned to laugh even when her heart felt heavy. She had learned to show strength even when she felt tired. People loved her for her joy, but they did not see how much she had to fight every day to keep that joy alive. She kept going. She kept giving love to the world, even when she felt some parts of her own spirit were still healing. The two first crossed paths while filming a movie years ago. Many called their connection magic, but it was not the type of magic that comes from romance or dramatic love stories. It was something deeper. It was recognition, like two souls who had walked through storms and saw that same rain in each other's eyes. They respected each other, truly respected. There was no pressure between them, no demands, no ego, just quiet understanding. Even after the movie ended, they stayed in touch. Not constantly, not loudly, just simply, like two steady lights in each other's universe. Sometimes they talked, sometimes they did not, but they always cared. One evening, years later, the world saw them at a public event together. Cameras flashed, people cheered, reporters rushed in, but Keanu noticed something others missed. Sandra was smiling, but her smile was trembling. He saw how she held herself, how her hands tightened slightly, the way someone does when they are trying to be strong even though something inside them is shaking. He moved toward her slowly, without making a scene, not to impress the crowd, not to create a headline. He did it because he cared, because that is who he is. When he opened his arms, Sandra stepped in without hesitation. Their hug was gentle at first, but then Sandra's shoulders lowered, like she was releasing a weight she had been holding for too long. Keanu did not speak. He did not need to. His arms around her said everything. I see you. You are not alone. I am here. The crowd saw just a hug, but for them, it was healing, and no one yet knew the reason Sandra needed that moment so deeply. The story was only beginning. The night after that hug, the world began talking. Social media, magazines, interviews, all were filled with pictures of Keanu and Sandra holding each other with a tenderness that felt rare in a world that moved too fast. Some people created stories, saying they were in love again. Others said it was just friendship. But no one truly knew what was happening behind that moment. Only Keanu and Sandra understood the weight of that hug. That same evening, when the lights faded and the event ended, Sandra went home. She took off the beautiful dress, removed the makeup, and sat alone in her quiet living room. The silence in the room felt heavy. She wrapped her arms around herself and took a slow breath. Earlier that week, she had received news that had shaken her deeply. Someone she cared about was ill, someone she could not imagine losing. She had been carrying the fear alone, not wanting to burden anyone, not wanting to appear weak in front of the world. But Keanu noticed. He always noticed. Meanwhile, Keanu went home too. He sat in his kitchen with a cup of tea, the steam rising slowly. He kept thinking about Sandra's trembling smile. He knew that look. He had worn that same expression many times. The feeling of pretending to be fine when your heart feels heavy. He thought about calling her, but he stopped himself. He did not want to intrude, but he could not shake the worry. For years, People had admired Keanu for his calm nature, but few understood that his calm was shaped by grief he had learned to live with. Loss had taught him to see details others overlooked. And that night, one detail stayed with him. Sandra needed someone. Not someone to fix anything. Just someone to sit beside her and breathe in the silence. The next morning, before the world fully woke up, there was a gentle knock on Sandra's door. She opened it and found Keanu standing there, holding 2 cups of coffee. He did not ask to come in. He just smiled softly and said, "I thought you might like some company today." She stepped aside and let him in. They did not talk right away. Instead, they sat on the floor in her living room, both holding warm cups in their hands. The sunlight slowly entered the room through the window. It felt safe. It felt quiet. It felt like a moment untouched by the outside world. Finally, Sandra spoke, her voice soft. "I'm scared, Keanu." He looked at her gently. "You don't have to hide that." Tears gathered in her eyes. She had been holding them back for days, maybe weeks, and now, sitting beside someone who understood sadness without needing explanations, she let them fall. Keanu did not tell her to be strong. He did not tell her everything would be okay. Sometimes, those words can feel empty. Instead, he listened. He let Sandra share her pain, her fear, her worry. He sat with it, quietly, respectfully, like he was holding something precious. And in a way, he was in that moment, their connection deepened. Not through romance or dramatic confessions, but through compassion. Real compassion. The kind that comes from 2 hearts that have survived storms and still learned how to be gentle. Outside, life continued. People drove to work. News headlines kept spinning. Cameras searched for stories. But inside that living room, the world slowed down. And this was only the first step towards something even more meaningful between them. The next few days passed slowly, almost quietly. Sandra tried to stay busy with work, scripts, meetings, smiling where she was expected to smile. But every time she was alone, the worry returned like a shadow that refused to leave. It rested in her chest and made breathing feel heavy. Yet, she also felt something she had not allowed herself to feel in a long time: comfort. Because she knew Keanu was there, not calling every hour, not asking endless questions, not trying to control the situation. He was just there, steady like a quiet lighthouse in a storm. One afternoon, Sandra invited him to her home again. Not because she needed to cry this time, but because she wanted to just exist with someone who understood how to be gentle. They sat outside on her porch. The air was warm. The sky was calm. They talked about ordinary things, childhood memories, movies they loved, little things that made them laugh. It felt easy, natural, real. But something changed that day. While they talked, Sandra received a message. Her expression shifted. Her breath paused. Keanu noticed immediately. She slowly set her phone down and stared into the distance, her eyes turning distant and deep. "It's getting worse," she whispered, her voice thin. Keanu did not look away. He did not panic. He simply moved his chair a little closer so she would not feel alone in that moment. "I don't know if I'm strong enough for this," she said, tears gathering again. "I try, but some days it feels too heavy." Keanu's voice was soft when he spoke. "Strength isn't about not breaking," he said. "It's about continuing to love even when everything hurts." She looked at him then, really looked. There was no performance in his eyes, no trying to impress, no dramatic gesture. Just truth, honest truth. He knew pain. He knew loss. He knew how it felt to wake up and have the world feel different, emptier, quieter. He knew how to keep moving when the heart wanted to stop. And because he knew, his words had weight. Real weight. Sandra leaned against him, resting her head on his shoulder. They stayed that way for a long time. No words, no rush. Just 2 souls sharing the same quiet. As days went on, Keanu became a gentle presence in her life. Not every day, not every moment, but in the moments that mattered. He would send her small messages that said things like, "I'm here if you need me," or "Remember to breathe today." Sometimes he brought her flowers, but never the expensive ones. He brought simple ones, daisies, wildflowers, small bunches that looked like they were chosen with love, not money. People around them began to notice. Some whispered that they were falling in love. Others believed they had always loved each other and were simply finding their way back. But it was not about romance, not yet. What was happening between them was deeper than that. It was connection. It was healing. It was to people understanding each other without needing to explain their wounds. And yet, the world around them was not silent. The news had started watching, curious. Questions began to rise. Rumors formed. Some were soft, some were harsh, some were cruel, and soon, one rumor in particular would hit them harder than either of them expected. And their quiet world would suddenly feel very loud. The rumor began like a whisper, soft and almost harmless. But whispers have a way of growing loud when carried by many voices. Soon, the online world was filled with headlines and comments. Some claimed that Keanu and Sandra were secretly dating. Others accused Sandra of depending on Keanu to stay relevant. Some even said Keanu was using Sandra for publicity, which could not have been farther from the truth. The words were sharp, careless, thrown around by people who did not know either of them. But words can still cut. And they did. Sandra saw the comments one morning, and her chest tightened. She had always known fame came with noise, but this was different. This felt personal. She felt exposed, misunderstood, vulnerable in a way that made her heart race. She sat alone at her dining table, scrolling through message after message, feeling her strength sink lower with each sentence. When Keanu arrived later that day, he found her sitting in the corner of her living room, knees pulled close, her phone face down beside her on the floor. Her eyes were red, but she was not crying. Sometimes pain becomes so deep it no longer spills out. It just sits like a heavy stone inside. He sat beside her quietly. He did not ask what was wrong. He already knew. "I didn't want this," she whispered. "I didn't want people to think I couldn't stand on my own. I've worked so hard to stay strong. I don't want anyone to think I'm weak." Keanu took a slow breath, his voice calm and steady. "Needing support does not mean weakness. It means you're human." She closed her eyes. "Then why do their words hurt so much?" "Because you care," he replied. "You care about people. You care about how kindness is received. You care about your work, your relationships, your heart. Of course their words would hurt, but that doesn't mean they're true." Sandra leaned her head back and stared at the ceiling, her voice trembling. "I don't want to be seen as a burden." Keanu turned to her, his expression steady and sincere. "I don't stay because you're a burden. I stay because you matter to me. You don't have to earn that. You don't have to fight for it. You just are." Silence filled the room again. A warm silence, not the heavy kind. Sandra breathed slowly. For the first time that day, her shoulders relaxed. But the world outside did not rest. Paparazzi began following them. People photographed them in grocery stores, walking through parking lots, leaving quiet cafes. Every expression was captured. Every quiet moment was turned into a headline. They could not control the story anymore. It was being told for them. One evening, Sandra broke down. She stood in her kitchen, holding her phone, tears finally falling freely. "This is too much, Keanu. I don't know how to handle all of this. I don't want to hurt the people I love. I don't want my fear to drown me." Keanu stepped closer, placing his hands gently on her shoulders, grounding her. "You are not alone. You do not have to face any of this alone. We face it together." She looked up at him, her eyes blurred with tears. "Why are you doing this? Why are you staying? Why do you care so much?" He hesitated, not because he didn't know the answer, but because the answer was bigger than words. He took a breath. "Because someone once stayed for me when my world was falling apart. And now it's my turn to stay for someone else." Sandra's tears fell harder then, but this time, they were not just tears of pain. They were tears of being seen. And being seen can change everything. The days that followed were filled with more challenges. The media attention grew stronger, and every move they made seemed to turn into a headline. But something else grew with it, something quieter but more powerful: trust. The kind of trust that does not come from words, but from presence. Keanu and Sandra found themselves spending more time together, not because they planned to, but because the world outside had become loud, and they needed somewhere to feel quiet again. One afternoon, Sandra suggested they take a drive far from the city. She said she needed air. Keanu agreed without asking questions. They got in the car and drove for hours, passing rivers, small towns, open fields, until the noise of life felt distant. They finally stopped near a lake where the water was still, and the wind moved softly through the trees. They sat on the grass, shoes off, toes touching the earth. It felt grounding, real, simple. No cameras, no expectations, just a human beings trying to breathe again. Sandra looked out at the water and spoke quietly. I've always tried to be strong, to be the person who makes others feel safe. But somewhere along the way, I forgot that I also need safety. I forgot that I am allowed to break sometimes. Keanu listened. He leaned back on his hands and watched the sky. I know what it feels like to carry the world quietly, to pretend that everything is fine because you think your pain will make others uncomfortable. But you don't have to do that with me. She turned to him slowly. Do you ever stop missing them? She asked. He knew who she meant. The people he had lost, the people whose memories lived silently in his heart. He shook his head gently. No, I don't stop missing them, but I've learned how to carry the missing. I let it live beside the love I still have. And some days, that love is what keeps me going. Sandra's eyes softened, filled with both sadness and understanding. I want to learn how to do that. I want to learn how to carry everything without losing myself. Keanu looked at her with a warmth that felt like a hand around her heart. You will. You already are. The wind breathed around them. The lake shimmered. The world slowed. Sandra leaned into him, resting her head on his shoulder again. This time, it felt different. Not just comfort, not just support, but connection. Gentle, honest, human connection. And in that quiet place, without noise or pressure, something grew between them. Not romance in the way movies show it, not fireworks, not sudden confessions. It was slower, steadier. It was trust woven with empathy. It was to hearts learning to hold each other softly. But the world they had stepped away from was still waiting. And while they were finding peace in each other's presence, something unexpected was happening. Someone close to Sandra's life was becoming sicker, and the news was coming soon. News that would change everything. News that would test both her strength and Keanu's promise to stay beside her. And when that moment came, the world would once again see a hug. But this time, it would not just touch the public. It would break them open. Because the deepest pain brings the deepest love to the surface. The call came early in the morning. The sky was still dark, and the world had not yet woken. Sandra's phone rang only once before she answered, her heart already knowing the voice on the other end would bring pain. The news was quiet, but it hit like thunder. The illness had worsened. The time they feared was closer now. The person Sandra loved so deeply, the one she had been fighting so hard to stay strong for, was slipping away. Her breath caught. Her fingers trembled. Her voice felt trapped inside her chest. She did not cry at first. She just stood there, still, as if her body needed time to understand what her heart already knew. Keanu arrived minutes later. He had sensed something before she even called. Sometimes, connection speaks louder than sound. He walked in and found her sitting on the floor in the hallway, phone in her hand, staring at nothing. She looked small. She looked tired. She looked like someone who had given everything and had nothing left to hold on to. He knelt in front of her. His voice was barely above a whisper. I'm here. Her eyes lifted slowly, and then she broke. The kind of breaking that does not come with loud sobs at first. It comes with silence. Her shoulders shook. Her face folded. Her breathing came uneven and painful. And Keanu wrapped his arms around her, holding her tightly, carefully, like she might shatter into pieces if held too roughly. This was the hug the world would one day see in pictures. The hug that would touch millions. The hug that people would call beautiful, iconic, inspirational. But those people would never know the story behind it. They would not know the grief Sandra carried in that moment. They would not know the quiet strength Keanu offered, without wanting anything in return. They traveled together to the hospital. Sandra's steps were slow, her hands trembling, but Keanu stayed close, not leading her, not pushing her, just walking with her, side by side. When they reached the room, the atmosphere felt heavy with both love and loss. Sandra sat beside the bed, holding the hand of the person she loved. Keanu stood behind her, his hands resting lightly on her shoulders, grounding her so she would not feel like she was facing this moment alone. They stayed like that for hours. Time became something soft, quiet, sacred. When the final moment came, Sandra leaned forward and whispered words of love, gratitude, memory. Words only the heart can speak. Keanu closed his eyes, his own heart aching, not because the pain belonged to him, but because he cared so much for the woman who was breaking in front of him. Afterward, when Sandra walked out into the hallway, her legs nearly gave out, and it was then that Keanu stepped forward and pulled her into his arms. Not gently this time. He held her like the world was falling apart, and he refused to let her fall with it. Sandra buried her face in his chest, her tears silent but deep, and Keanu rested his chin softly on her head, his arms wrapping around her like a shelter. This was the hug that cameras captured later, the hug that the world played again and again, the hug that made millions feel something they could not explain. But to them, it was simply two souls holding each other through pain. That not love defined by romance, not love defined by labels, but love defined by presence. The kind of love that heals. And when Sandra took her first deep breath again, Keanu was still there. And he always would be.